Hey everyone, and welcome to our April Improving Lives Through Art event, the second virtual tour and final event of the MSAA Spring 2023 Improving Lives Through Art series. My name is Joe Caliva, and I will once again be your host and docent or tour guide this evening. And tonight, after visiting Italy and France back during the fall season, and after featuring 3 American artists in our March tour this season, we'll wrap up the year in a fitting way by going on a world tour of wellness, featuring 4 different artists from 4 different countries, each with an unforgettable story of using art as a means to wellness and to improve the quality of their lives. We'll hear the inspiring stories of Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec from France, Vasily Kandinsky from Russia, Christy Brown from Ireland, and Andy Warhol from the United States. And tonight, just as we did back in March, we'll once again head to my hometown of Philadelphia to visit the magnificent Philadelphia Museum of Art, where we'll view several of the pieces featured in tonight's presentation. But of course, we'll feature many works from many other museums as well. So thank you for joining me for this very special tour. And I'd like to invite all of you who are joining live tonight on Zoom to stick around after the presentation, when you'll have a chance to unmute your microphones and cameras and join in a roundtable type of discussion. And as we've done after every virtual tour this season and back in the fall, I will once again be hosting a little game of trivia for some fun and to see how well you all were paying attention. There will be a prize for our trivia winner, so be sure to take some notes while you're watching tonight. But before we begin, as always, for the last time this season, I'd like to introduce the president and CEO of MSAA, Ms. Gina Murdoch, for a few special words to help us get the night started. Gina?
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and welcome to the next installment of our Improving Lives Through Art Spring Series. We are so thrilled that you could join us this evening and incredibly honored by the support that we've seen from the MS community for this MSAA's newest program. I'd also like to thank Joe Caliva, our art enthusiast and docent, who is going to take us through 4 incredible artists from around the globe who, despite their health challenges, have really used art to improve their lives. I'm so excited to listen and learn right along with you. Please know that MSAA could not continue to innovate and provide critical programs and services for the MS community without your continued support. So tonight is going to be and continues to be incredibly special for all of these events. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor, Publicis, and our gold sponsors, Pharma and Sandoz, for their continued support. So I am excited. I'm ready to go. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Gina. And before we get started, I want to remind all of you about a couple very special events coming up in the weeks ahead. First, get your paintbrushes ready and come on out to our second paint along of the season. Our new instructor, Omira Rivera-Filardi, will be returning once again, and this time she'll be leading all of us in creating this beautiful painting, perfect for springtime. And it's the companion piece to the painting we created back in February. So if you joined us for that paint along, you definitely don't want to miss this one. That's 1 week from tonight, next Tuesday, April 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern. So mark your calendars and come paint along with Omira. And just a few weeks after that, be sure to get your tickets for the Improving Lives Benefit 2023. And just like in 2022, there will once again be 2 events this year. The Live Together Again in-person event in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on May 3rd at the Barnes Foundation. and the virtual Together at Home event on May 18th. Tyler Campbell will be returning to host both events again this year. And this year's mission honoree, I am proud to announce, is none other than the fabulous Selma Blair. This year's corporate honoree is the remarkable maker of cooling vests and other temperature therapeutics, Polar Products. So be sure to go to engage.mymsaa.org/benefit2023 for more information and to get your tickets. Or you can click on the link that Madison just shared in the chat. As always, and for the last time this season, I'd also like to echo Gina's gratitude to our wonderful sponsors, Publicis Health, our diamond sponsor, and our gold sponsors, Sandoz and Pharma, for not only making tonight's event possible, but the entire Improving Lives Through Art series as well. Thank you to Publicis Health, Sandoz, and Pharma for your support of MSAA. And finally, I would like to remind all of you who are joining us live tonight on Zoom to use the chat box function to jot down any questions or comments you have during the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have a roundtable discussion at the end of the program, but the chat box is a good way of writing your question down as you think of it so you don't forget it later. And I can see some people are doing this already. Go ahead, if you haven't, and jot down in the chat where you are tuning in from tonight. And as always, we'll try to give you a shout out a little bit later. One final note, for the trivia part of the evening, it always helps to have a second device nearby. So if you're watching this presentation on your laptop or computer, have your smartphone or iPad or tablet nearby. If you're watching it on your phone, have a tablet or other mobile device nearby if one's available. You can still play the trivia game if you do not have a second device, but it will just make it a little bit easier for you to continue viewing my shared screen while answering the questions. All right, so without any further delay, let's get started. Our first artist tonight was born with a hereditary condition so rare it has come to be known by his name, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He was actually born Henri Marie Raymond de Toulouse-Lautrec Montfa in 1864. He was born in southern France into an aristocratic family which descended from both the counts and noble families from the cities of Toulouse, Lautrec, and Montfa in southern France, hence his very long name. He would eventually just come to be known simply as Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. If he had outlived his father, Henri would have been given the family title of the Count of Toulouse-Lautrec. His parents separated after the death of his younger brother in 1868, and Henri lived with his mother in Paris, where he began drawing sketches and caricatures in his exercise books. A friend of his father, an artist named René Princeteau, gave Henri a few lessons. But Princeteau's style had a big impact on the young artist. Princeteau's specialty was paintings of horses, which became a common theme in Toulouse-Lautrec's early paintings as well. Especially, as you can see here, in his circus paintings, for which Toulouse-Lautrec was well known later in his career. Another reason for his frequent drawings of horses may have been that horse riding was a favorite activity of his family. But due to bone problems Toulouse-Lautrec experienced at a young age, he wasn't able to ride very often. So he turned to his art to experience the joy of riding instead. In 1875, at the age of 11, Toulouse-Lautrec's bone issues were getting worse. So his mother took him back to the south of France to try and find out what was wrong. At the time, doctors couldn't figure out what was causing Toulouse-Lautrec's slow growth and fragile bones. But many studies conducted after his death have found that most of his congenital health issues were probably related to the fact that his parents were first cousins. There had been a long history of marriage between blood relatives in his family, as was the case with many aristocratic and noble families at the time. This can cause a whole host of genetic disorders, but brittle bones or limb malformations are among the most common. In 1877, at the age of 13, the young Henri fell and broke his leg. Sadly, just a few months later, he fell again, breaking his other leg. Due to his previous bone condition, the fractures he sustained to both femur bones in his legs never completely healed, and his legs never developed properly. This resulted in Henri being only 5 feet tall, with an ordinary-sized adult torso, but the legs of a child. Many modern physicians have tried to determine the disease that caused Toulouse-Lautrec's health issues. Some have theorized it was osteoporosis. Others have diagnosed dwarfism or brittle bone disease. But in 1955, a physician named Dr. G. Séjourné made what is most likely the first scientifically correct diagnosis, a rare condition called Pycnodysostosis, an extremely rare condition which leads to fragile, dense bones, body deformities, and other physical conditions. It is so rare, scientists and doctors more commonly refer to it by another name, Toulouse-Lautrec syndrome. Being one of the first documented cases of the disease, it now bears his name. Due to his health problems, the painter was forced to stay in a sanatorium for long periods. But once again, art was the young Henri's source of comfort. And in the long periods of forced immobility, Toulouse-Lautrec deepened his passion for painting, drawing relentlessly on whatever he could find, sketchbooks, albums, and even scraps of paper. In 1882, Toulouse-Lautrec moved back to Paris with the hope of becoming a fashionable and respected painter. He was drawn to the area of Paris known as Montmartre, which was famous for its bohemian lifestyle and which was a popular haunt of Parisian artists, writers, and philosophers. While there, he studied at the famous studio of Fernand Cormon, where he met and became friends with other influential artists at the time, like Émile Bernard and Vincent van Gogh. But the appeal of Montmartre to Toulouse-Lautrec was more than just an artistic one. Back home, people from his family's aristocratic circle of friends treated him like an outcast due to his illness and unusual appearance. He wasn't able to find any romantic interests, and among his peers, he was a social pariah. But in Montmartre, he was surrounded by others who were often excluded from society, such as struggling artists and prostitutes. Among them, he wasn't an outcast. He was accepted as one of them. And Toulouse-Lautrec frequently painted portraits of his fellow misfits, like this one of Vincent van Gogh. Or portraits like this one that exalted the working class or urban underclass, and those who did whatever they had to in order to survive and get by. But another appeal of Montmartre was definitely the nightlife. And perhaps the most popular night spot at the time was the famous Moulin Rouge, otherwise known as the birthplace of the dance known as the can-can. Toulouse-Lautrec was one of the very first customers there and loved spending his nights at the notorious cabaret. The owners commissioned Toulouse-Lautrec to produce a series of advertising posters for the club. And while other artists balked at doing this type of commercial work, Toulouse-Lautrec loved it, and in the process created some of his most notable works. In fact, the style of these posters that he painted have become and still are synonymous with Montmartre and that era of Parisian nightlife. Toulouse-Lautrec was so popular at the Moulin Rouge, he had a reserved seat there, and his paintings and posters hung throughout its rooms and halls. One of those paintings, which hung above the bar at the Moulin Rouge, you can see here in Philadelphia at the Museum of Art. And it's considered by many historians to be his most famous work. Titled simply, At the Moulin Rouge, the painting portrays one of the nightclub's stars, a dancer named Valentine, who you can see in the background there, with his pointed toes and rubbery legs, facing a female partner whose animated kicks reveal her red stockings and white petticoats. It shows an informal moment between performances and between two of its biggest stars. And it highlights the club's regular clientele and its exciting atmosphere. However, despite his successes and his popularity, Toulouse-Lautrec sadly developed yet another illness while living and working in his beloved Montmartre, that of addiction and alcoholism. Even though he found kinship among his fellow artists and outcasts, the pain of being mocked for his physical appearance, many failed romantic relationships, and feeling cut off from his family may have contributed to his abuse of alcohol. He frequently mocked himself, even in his artwork, perhaps to appear unaffected by the comments and jokes he surely often heard, but more likely to express an unspoken heartache and a painful reality. In September 1901, due to poor health attributed to alcoholism and syphilis, Toulouse-Lautrec died at only 36 years of age. And though he lived a tragically short life, profoundly impacted by illness and health problems, those conditions transformed Toulouse-Lautrec into the unique artist he will forever be remembered as. He found solace and acceptance among a group of people who were often ignored or shunned. Then he humanized and celebrated them through his work. His courage to live a full life despite his genetic challenges helped doctors and scientists better understand the condition decades after his death. Art certainly helped Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec improve his own life. But through his art, he has helped and continues to help improve the lives of countless others. For our second artist tonight, we'll go from France to Russia, a country that has been in the news and on our minds for the past few years, and the past year in particular, for reasons which are heartbreaking and difficult to understand. But tonight, we'll focus not on its government, but on one of its most influential artists, who, by having a rare neurological condition, found the inspiration to change the way we see color and the way we see the world. I'm talking, of course, about Wassily Kandinsky, a name you may have heard me mention several times at previous ILTA events. His full name was Wassily Wassilyevich Kandinsky, and he was born in 1866 in the capital city of Moscow, Russia, but spent most of his childhood in Odessa, a seaport city that's actually located in Ukraine, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time. While in school, he studied many different subjects, including art, and actually graduated from the popular Grekov Art School in Odessa, Ukraine. But by the time he went to college, he put art aside and focused on law and economics, in which he received a degree from the University of Moscow. However, he recalled later in life that as a child, he was always fascinated and stimulated by color. He never outgrew this fascination, and it would eventually become the foundation of his life's work. Immediately after graduating from the University of Moscow, he became quite a respected lawyer and professor, and was given a position teaching law at what was then the University of Dorpat, what is known today as Tartu in Estonia, where he also took part in ethnographic research expeditions. By the time he reached his late 20s, Kandinsky was quite successful and carved out a prestigious and lucrative career for himself. But an experience he had when he was 30 years old would have such an impact on him, it would change his life forever. In 1896, while attending a performance here at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow of an opera by Richard Wagner called Lohengrin, Kandinsky had a profoundly moving experience. As he listened to the music, he began seeing colors or differently colored shapes appear in front of him. He realized right away that different instruments produced different colors. For example, when he heard trumpets, he saw yellow. Violins made him see green. The sounds of flutes flashed light blue before his eyes, and cellos dark blue. He later wrote of the experience, "I saw all my colors in spirit before my eyes. Wild, almost crazy lines were sketched in front of me." He was so profoundly moved, he abandoned his promising law career to become an artist. At the age of 30, Kandinsky moved to Germany and enrolled at the prestigious Munich Academy of Arts. And what Kandinsky experienced was most likely due to a neurological phenomenon called synesthesia. It's a rare but very real condition in which one sense, like hearing, can trigger activity in another sense, such as sight. People with other forms of synesthesia might smell something when they hear a sound, or taste something when they see a shape or color. Some synesthetes, as they're called, can feel a sympathetic sense of touch. For example, if they observe someone else being tapped on the shoulder, they'll feel the same sensation of tapping on their own shoulder. In Kandinsky's case, he literally saw colors when he heard music. But with his condition, it went both ways. He also heard music as he painted. He spent the first few years after he began his studies in art experimenting with various styles of painting and studying the work of the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, like Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso and Claude Monet. In fact, Monet's series of haystack paintings had a particularly strong impact on Kandinsky. He wrote, "I only knew they were haystacks because the catalog told me so. I could not recognize them. I felt that the object of the painting was missing, and I noticed, with surprise and confusion, that the picture not only gripped me, but permanently impressed itself on my memory. Painting took on a fairy tale power and splendor." Some of Kandinsky's early paintings show this influence of Monet, like in this piece from 1898 titled Odessa Port. Other works showed influences by post-impressionist painters, like this piece from 1907 titled Couple on Horseback, which echoes the pointillism technique made famous by artists like George Seurat. Or this piece from 1908 titled Munich Schwabing with the Church of St. Ursula, which clearly shows an influence of the Fauvism style of Henri Matisse, where the colors are used more to express Kandinsky's experience of the subject matter, not to describe what he called objective nature. In fact, as he continued in his studies and with his paintings, he progressively moved further and further away from objective painting and more toward abstraction, always with a concentration on color. For Kandinsky, color had the ability to put viewers in touch with their spiritual selves. He believed, for example, that yellow could disturb, while blue awakened the highest spiritual aspirations. This was also due in large part to the profound impact music had on Kandinsky as a result of his neurological condition. He was obsessed with the fact that music was the one truly abstract art. Nobody listens to music and wonders what it's supposed to be or what it's supposed to represent. People simply listen to music and enjoy the combinations of tones and harmony, all of which puts the listener in contact with their spiritual self. Kandinsky wanted to use color and shapes to create a visual harmony. He wanted to paint music. In 1912, Kandinsky wrote and published a treatise called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. In it, he wrote eloquently about his theories on art's potential to evoke psychological, physical, and emotional responses, and he challenged his contemporaries to free their work from traditional bonds. Always using music as an example and guide, he wrote, "Other art forms are finding in music the best teacher. Music has been for some centuries the art which has devoted itself not to the reproduction of natural phenomena, but rather to the expression of the artist's soul in musical sound." The treatise is now considered to be the first theoretical foundation of abstract art and one of the most important books in art history. He spent the rest of his career exploring this visual music, in some cases with paintings like these, which you can find at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which he called improvisations. He described these improvisations as largely unconscious, spontaneous expressions of inner character, the non-material nature. He also created works like this one, which he called impressions. He described these works as direct impressions of outward nature, expressed in purely artistic form. This piece, for example, is an impression of a concert he attended, which could be interpreted as shapes influenced by the performance, like people in the audience and the piano on the stage, or as just colorful representations of the sounds of the instruments that he heard from the orchestra. He later added shapes to his quest for visual harmony, as we can see in this painting found at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, titled Circles in a Circle, which Kandinsky painted in 1923. The famous French painter Marcel Duchamp wrote about Kandinsky's geometric paintings. In tracing his lines with ruler and compass, Kandinsky opened to the spectator a new way of looking at painting, a clear transfer of thought on canvas. In the last 10 years of his life, Kandinsky combined both color and shapes to create paintings that he called compositions, like this one, titled Composition 10 from 1939, and this one, titled Composition 9 from 1936. His impression and improvisation paintings were his musical equivalents of woodwind quartets or a violin sonata. These late compositions are his symphonies, his visually harmonic masterpieces. In his treatise concerning the spiritual in art, Kandinsky wrote, "Color is the keyboard. The eyes are the harmonies. The soul is the piano with many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key or another to cause vibrations in the soul." Wassily Kandinsky died while living in France in December 1944, just 3 days shy of his 78th birthday. His experience with this neurological phenomenon called synesthesia, which some might even call a disorder, never led him to seek treatment or try to correct it. Instead, he embraced this rare condition and allowed it to guide his artistic journey, helping him to create the foundation for the plethora of abstract art that came after him. Through his quest to find the spiritual in art, he helped to set color free and change the course of art history forever. For our next artist, we'll head to a country nicknamed the Emerald Isle for its wide expanses of lush green fields. And we'll meet an artist who just might be the most remarkable example of motivation, determination, and the power of art to improve lives. His name is Christopher Brown, or as most of the world has come to know him, Christy Brown. He was born into a working-class Irish family in 1932 in the capital city of Dublin. He was one of 22 siblings. Out of the 22, only 13 survived, but 9 died in infancy. When Christy was 4 months old, his mother noticed that there was something wrong with his health. She noticed that he couldn't hold his head upright or control his body movements. After seeking medical advice, the family's worst fears were confirmed. Christy had a severe case of cerebral palsy, a neurological disorder that affects the muscles. It's caused by abnormal brain development, usually before birth, and symptoms include exaggerated reflexes, limp or rigid limbs, and involuntary movements. In Christy's case, it left him almost entirely spastic in his limbs and over most of his body. He was unable to walk, sit up, use his hands, or feed himself. It was also nearly impossible for him to speak, since the cerebral palsy, or CP, also affected the muscles in his throat, neck, and face. Though doctors urged his parents to commit him to a hospital, his mother was determined to raise Christy at home with their other children. The only part of his body over which Christy had any control at all was his left leg. For years, he would use his only unaffected limb to slide himself on the floor or stomp his foot to try and communicate. But, remarkably, after discovering a few books in his home, with an unimaginable amount of determination, Christy taught himself how to both write and draw using only his left leg and his left foot. He quickly matured into a serious artist and writer, creating a large number of paintings and focusing his writing primarily on poetry. When he was a young child, many of the neighborhood children played with Christy. But as he grew into a teenager and a young adult, he became more and more isolated and reclusive. Cerebral palsy doesn't affect cognition or mental development. Emotionally and internally, Christy was experiencing everything any normal teenager does. But being trapped in his body and not being able to date or socialize with his peers, art and poetry offered Christy the solace and companionship he longed for. At the age of 18, Christy moved to the city of Lourdes in France. There, he continued to write and paint, and also took part in new treatments for cerebral palsy, which led to the improvement of his speech and physical condition. Around the same time, he met an Irish doctor named Robert Collis, who had established a clinic for people living with cerebral palsy, and Christy was his very first patient there. Collis was also a noted author, and he noticed right away Christy's natural gift and talent for storytelling. He helped and guided Christy with his writing, which also served as a kind of therapy, learning how to type with the toe of his left foot. And it was with Collis's help in 1954, at the age of 22 years old, Christy wrote and published an autobiography, which he titled My Left Foot, a moving account of his battle to find his creative voice and be heard, despite living with this incurable disease, which robbed him of so much. The book quickly became an international sensation, and Christy soon became one of the giants of Irish literature. Though he continued to paint and draw, his primary focus was on writing. And in 1967, he published a best-selling novel titled Down All the Days, considered by some to be his magnum opus. It's another semi-autobiographical story of Dublin in the 1940s and 50s. Several years after that, in 1974, he published another novel titled A Shadow on Summer. Yet, again, another autobiographical novel about a disabled artist who goes to Connecticut and New York to finish a book and struggles with his need to find the love of a woman. It's based on his own trip to Connecticut, where he traveled to finish a novel, and where he met and began an affair with a woman named Beth Moore. But despite his professional and artistic success, Christy often fell victim to bouts of depression. He continued to struggle emotionally with his physical limitations, and this often led to excessive drinking and eventually alcoholism, a condition which sadly, as we've heard earlier tonight, affects many artists. Christy also struggled with his romantic relationships. In 1972, he ended his 12-year relationship with Beth Moore, whom he met in Connecticut, and married a woman named Mary Carr. Though he was happy for a short while, many believe Carr became abusive and neglectful toward Christy, and this only worsened his already deteriorating mental and physical health. Christy openly admitted in letters to concerned friends at the time that he knew the consequences of his continued drinking, but didn't want to stop. In 1981, he wrote in a letter to a friend, "The simple truth of the matter is that I just don't want to quit. I don't want to be cured or rehabilitated. I'm aware of what the consequences are bound to be, but amazingly, I don't seem to care." A few days later, Christy tragically choked to death while eating dinner. He was 49 years old. Christy Brown is probably one of the most remarkable examples of determination and living the fullest life possible, despite whatever challenges you face. He is the very definition of a life improved through art, through painting, through writing, through poetry. His incredible story, as told in his first book, My Left Foot, was actually adapted into a film in 1989. Daniel Day-Lewis portrayed Christy and won the Academy Award that year for Best Actor for his role in the film. From the earliest moments after he miraculously taught himself to write and draw, Christy Brown expressed his passion for living through his art. In one of his earliest poems, he wrote, as a child, "The greatest art is the art of living. The greatest artist, the liver of life." For our final artist this evening, we'll come back home to the United States and talk about a man who is arguably the single most recognized name among American modern artists from the mid-20th century onward. And even if you think you're not familiar with his name or his work, I would bet that you encounter art that has been influenced or impacted by him on almost a daily basis. I'm talking, of course, about Andy Warhol. His name is synonymous with the pop art movement that began in the 1950s. And if you've come across any images that look like this recently, well, you can thank Andy Warhol for that. He was born Andrew Warhola Jr. in 1928, not far from here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to working-class parents who emigrated to the U.S. from what was then Austria-Hungary and the area now known as the country of Slovakia. Not much is known about his childhood before the age of about 9, when he was in the 3rd grade. At that time, Warhol was diagnosed with a condition called Sydenham chorea, also known as St. Vitus's dance, another neurological condition and autoimmune disorder that affects children after they contract rheumatic fever or strep throat. It leads to uncontrollable movements in the hands, arms, shoulders, face, and legs. The condition is treatable, but it required Warhol to frequently be confined to his bed for long periods of time. During these times, he drew, listened to the radio, and collected pictures of movie stars. He later described these periods as crucial in the development of his personality, his skills, and his creative voice. As a teenager, Warhol also suffered from pigment issues that caused discoloration of his skin. He was often teased, but once again would find comfort and solace in his art, which he continued to study through high school. The teasing about his appearance as a child led Warhol to always be obsessed with his appearance as an adult, often altering his clothes, wearing wigs, cosmetics, and even trying plastic surgery. But after graduating high school, Warhol enrolled in the Carnegie Institute of Technology, now known as Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where he studied commercial art. During his time there, he served as the art director of the student art magazine called Kano, in which he illustrated his first two published works, this cover design in 1948 and this full-page interior illustration in 1949. After graduating from Carnegie Mellon in 1949, he moved to New York City and began a career in magazine illustration and advertising. His first commission in New York City was for Glamour magazine, where his illustration for this article led to a commission of a series of shoe drawings that the famous magazine needed. The illustrations he created had a huge impact on readers of the magazine, but more importantly, it had an even bigger impact on the shoe manufacturer Israel Miller, who immediately hired Warhol to design shoes for his company. While working in the shoe industry, Warhol developed his blotted line technique, which uses a modified printing process with inked tracing paper to repeat a basic image while creating endless variations on the same theme like you see here. These shoe designs were not only his livelihood, but the very beginnings of Warhol's future as a pop artist. Over the next several years, Warhol experimented with other commercial illustration techniques, like using an often frowned upon process of tracing photographs projected with a machine called a napedioscope, much like a slide projector. One of the earliest examples of this technique by Warhol was with this photograph by a photographer named Edward Volovich, who was also Warhol's lover at the time. Warhol traced and hatched the shadows of the photograph and used it as the cover design for a book in 1956. Around the same time, there was a boom in the record industry, and this gave Warhol a lot of work designing album covers. Over the course of his career, he created dozens of covers, and all of them are now considered some of the most iconic album covers in history. Andy Warhol had become a rock star in his own right, in the art world and in mainstream culture. And though he and other pop artists were often condemned by critics for not rejecting consumerism or what critics called market culture at the time, Warhol never wavered in his pursuit to elevate commercial illustration and design to fine art. Then, in May of 1962, Warhol was featured in an article in Time magazine, and in what might be considered the greatest thumb of the nose to critics of all time, he featured a painting in the article which would become his most iconic work and which would change the face of 20th century art. Big Campbell's soup can with can opener, vegetable. It's a reinterpretation of the classic still life, but instead of fruits and vegetables, Andy chose a soup can and raised this mundane, everyday object to the level of high art. The 6-foot-tall painting led to Warhol's first solo museum show at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, Connecticut in July 1962. But when the show opened, Warhol exhibited not one, but 32 paintings of Campbell's soup cans. Each canvas is 20 inches tall and 16 inches wide. They were created through the use of a commercial silkscreen process, which, similar to his shoe designs years earlier, it allowed Warhol to create his characteristic repetitions and variations, but much more quickly and efficiently. Through this use of repetition and commercial subject matter, pop culture became high culture, and the pop art movement was cemented in the annals of art history forever. In the following years, Warhol applied this silkscreen process to other subjects, most notably his beloved movie stars, a passion he discovered as a young boy while recovering from his autoimmune disease. The celebrities he depicted included some of the most famous pop culture icons of the time, like Liz Taylor, Elvis Presley, and perhaps his most noted celebrity subject, Marilyn Monroe. And in what seems to be an expansion upon the groundwork laid by the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists of the 19th century, Warhol experimented with representing the same subject multiple times with different color interpretations, like we saw earlier with Claude Monet and the haystack paintings. But Warhol took it into a new era and presented them with a new modern spin. But all his fame, success, and notoriety came at a terrible cost. On June 3rd, 1968, a woman entered Warhol's studio in New York City and shot him, and a man named Mario Amaya, an art critic and magazine editor he was meeting with at the time. The shooter was an actress named Valerie Solanas, who had been trying for years to get Warhol to produce an extremist screenplay she had written, which called for overthrowing the government and eliminating men. Warhol repeatedly rejected having anything to do with the project, and so Solanas, who was later diagnosed with severe mental illness, decided to kill him. 2 bullets from Solanas's gun tore through Warhol's stomach, liver, spleen, esophagus, and both of his lungs. He was briefly declared dead at one point, but doctors were able to revive him. He spent 2 months in the hospital recuperating from various surgeries, but would be forced to wear a surgical corset for the rest of his life. Mario Amaya, the art critic who was with Warhol at the time, received only minor injuries and was released from the hospital the same day. Solanas was arrested the day after the assault. But the shooting had a profound effect on Warhol's life and art. In addition to the considerable physical scars and damage the shooting left, perhaps the emotional damage and the emotional scars were much worse. Warhol became much more isolated and guarded. He continued to work through the 1970s and 80s, painting many portraits of some of the most notable public figures and celebrities at the time. But his work took on a much darker, more macabre tone. He created a series of silkscreen prints of guns, portrayed in a variety of colors, but most strikingly, and perhaps most tellingly, were the interpretations in blood red. He also painted a series of skulls in what many historians consider to be his interpretation of memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning remember that you are mortal. They recall the centuries-long tradition in art that reminds us of our mortality. But in this case, it's filtered through the lens of Warhol's encounter with death. But arguably, the greatest impact the shooting had on Warhol was the intense fear and loathing it instilled in him of hospitals. Despite his ongoing physical and mental health problems due to the shooting, he couldn't bring himself to seek treatment in a hospital or healthcare facility, turning instead to alternative medicine, which had little or no effect on him. In 1987, Warhol had been suffering from acute gallbladder issues, possibly complicated from the injuries he sustained years earlier. When his pain became too severe, he finally conceded to gallbladder surgery, a procedure that he had delayed for several years due to his fear of hospitals. But after years of neglecting his health, the surgery proved to be more than his body could handle. And Andy Warhol died shortly after surgery on February 22nd, 1987, from cardiac arrest. He was 58 years old. As I've mentioned before in this series, art can't cure or take away illness or disease. But Andy Warhol is yet another example of how art can improve a person's wellness and quality of life while living with the challenges of a disease or illness. When he was a boy battling a neurological disorder or coping with the pain of being teased or ridiculed, drawing gave him comfort and lit the fire that would fuel his passion for the rest of his life. And after the tragic shooting, art gave him a purpose despite his limited physical abilities and health, and also helped him process the emotional burden of such an unthinkable act. All of the artists tonight prove that while art can't cure an illness, it can certainly help someone heal from it, and maybe even help them find acceptance or discover their voice or see the world in a completely different way. Thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight for this world tour of wellness. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you joined us for other ILT events, thank you for making this spring 2023 Improving Life Through Art series such a great success. In just a little bit, we are going to play our trivia game. But if anybody has any questions or comments or would like to join in the discussion, you can raise your virtual hand, or I think you all have the ability to unmute cameras and unmute your microphones. You can just jump in and ask away. In the meantime, I will scroll through the chat here and just give a few shout outs to people joining us tonight. First I see is Martha from San Diego. Thank you for joining us, Martha, from the West Coast. And Tracy from Grand Island, Florida. Hey, Tracy, thank you so much for joining. Above Tracy is Joe from Woodbury, New Jersey. That sounds familiar. Oh, it's me. Rebecca from Matawan, New Jersey. Hey, Rebecca. Somebody is here from the Jersey Shore. Who can that be? Oh, it's our president and CEO, Gina Murdoch. Gina, thanks for joining tonight. Madison from Mullica Hill, New Jersey. And I think that is it. Maybe a few more others coming in here. Dr. Barry Singer. Dr. Singer, thank you so much. I hope I did. Thank you for the compliments. I hope I did okay pronouncing some of these medical conditions. I have an easier time pronouncing French and Russian names than I do medical terminology. So if any corrections need to be made, please feel free to jump in. As I mentioned earlier, folks, we are going to do a little game of trivia, which should only take about 5-10 minutes. And as I mentioned, there is a prize, although I have to say Jen is not with us tonight, and she usually has what the prize is. So if you win tonight, we'll contact you about what the prize is. I want to take a moment, though, while we're waiting. If there's any other comments that people want to post or questions, you can take that time now before we start our trivia. But want to thank the incredible team of people at MSAA that makes this Improving Lives Through Art series possible. And that, of course, begins at the top with our president and CEO, Gina Murdoch, Rebecca Mooney, Jen Gaynor, and a special shout out to Madison Besk Summers, who is running the show behind the scenes tonight on her own. Thank you, Madison, and thank you, ILTA team, for making all of this possible. And I would also like to once again reiterate a thank you to our sponsors tonight, Publicis Health, our diamond sponsor, and our gold sponsors, Sandoz and Pharma. They have made this spring series and the fall series possible, and possible for the MSAA to present these events and paint-alongs. Which, by the way, don't forget, if you are inspired tonight to do some painting after hearing these stories, we do have one more paint-along. I kept saying this is the final event. I forgot that we moved the paint-along to next week. So you have some time to sign up for that. You can join us next Tuesday. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining once again. And I'm going to go ahead and put this QR code up on the screen here. This is what we'll be using tonight for our trivia game. We have 10 questions, and let me go ahead and make that a little bit bigger for everyone. If you do not have a smartphone or a way to scan the device, I'm going to put a link in the chat. So you can either click on the link that I just posted in the chat, or use your smartphone to scan this QR code that is on your screen right now. The reason for the smartphone or the second device is the screen that you're looking at right now with the QR code. That is where you're going to see the questions being asked. But you have to answer on a device of your own, like the computer that you're watching on right now, or a second device. So if you're watching this on your computer, it'll be easier to answer the questions on your phone. So I can see some people joining already. I'm going to leave the QR code up here. Somebody named Artist One. Okay, we have an artist in the group tonight. Thank you for joining. We have see, we're bringing everyone together. The medical community, Dr. Barry Singer. We have artists. So it's great that such a diverse group of people have joined us tonight. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Go ahead and scan that QR code or click on the link in the chat to start the or to bring you to the website where you will see the game and be able to put in your responses. Now, the thing about Kahoot that is hosting this trivia game, it does have a timing feature. So even if everyone gets all of the questions correct, it also calculates the timing that it took you to answer correctly. So there's also a race against the clock. So the quicker you answer, the higher your score, and the more chances you have to win this mystery present or mystery prize that I don't know about. So, all right. It looks like we have a lot of people in the room waiting to go. So I am going to go ahead and hit start and get us started here. All right, here it comes. Get your devices ready for the ILTA World Tour of Wellness Trivia. First question. If Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec outlived his father, he would have been given what noble title? What noble title would Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec have been given if he lived longer than his father? Remember, his family came from aristocratic and noble family. Would it be Duke, Count, Baron, or Prince? Yes. Wow, looks like most people got that one right. All 8. Wow, fantastic. So yes, he was a count, or comte. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive my French. But yes, he would have been Count de Toulouse-Lautrec. So all 8 got it correct, but let's see who was the fastest. Daffodil. I love this name, by the way. I have a bunch of wild daffodils growing around my house right now. All right, well, but all the scores are pretty close, so it's a toss-up. But Daffodil is in the lead right now. Let's go on to question number 2. Though Vasily Kandinsky lived most of his life in Moscow, he was actually born in Ukraine. Is that true or false? True or false? Though Vasily Kandinsky lived most of his life in Moscow, he was actually born in Ukraine. About 6 seconds left. Just have to remember where he was born. And time is up. And we should be seeing the correct answer here. And just there we go. Oh, wow. It was a split down the middle, but it was actually false. The reverse is the truth. He was born in Moscow, but actually lived most of his life in the city of Odessa in Ukraine. So good job. 50% of you. Let's see how this affected the scores. All right, Daffodil, you just dropped a little bit. Artist 1 is in the lead now. So, all right, folks, got to put on those thinking caps. There's some tricky answers coming up. Tricky questions, I should say. All right, number 3. Including those who survived and didn't survive, how many siblings did Christy Brown have? A lot of typos in this question. I'm sorry. Including those who survived and didn't survive, how many siblings did Christy Brown have? 13, 21, 7, or 3? And time is up. Yes, he had 21 siblings. He was one of 22 children. Those who picked the answer in red or 2, the number 13, you're thinking of the number that survived. In the Brown family, 13 of the 22 children survived and 9 did not. I told you, they get harder as we get further up the ladder here. Artist number 1 stays in the lead. Daffodil gets a little flame next to her, or his name, or their name, with 3 correct answers in a row. All right, good job. Let's move on to number 4. True or false? Something you might hear a synesthete or someone who has synesthesia say is, the pasta tastes blue tonight. True or false? Something you might hear a synesthete or someone who has synesthesia say is, the pasta tastes blue tonight. Is that true or false? Time is up. And yes, wow, about 90%, I would say, 95% of you got that one correct. So yes, in some forms of synesthesia, the sense of sight can trigger the sense of taste. And particular colors or shapes, there is documentation of people seeing colors, or when they see a color, they taste something. So they will describe something as, this tastes kind of blue to me, or this tastes kind of orange. Let's see where the standings are now. Artist retains the lead, and she's widening that gap. Daffodil, neck and neck. Bree, Vicky, Martha, very close. It can go any way, folks. All right, we're halfway through. Question number 5. Andy Warhol's first commission in New York City was for what famous fashion magazine? Vogue, Elle, Glamour, or Runway? Which famous fashion magazine did Andy Warhol first work for? Vogue, Elle, Glamour, or Runway? And only 3 of those 4 magazines is actually a real magazine. Time is up. And Wow. Okay. Some multiple answers here, but yes, it was Glamour. Glamour magazine. Um, Somebody answered Runway. I would love to know who that is. Um, Runway is actually the name of the fictional magazine from Devil Wears Prada, and I'm not ashamed to say it's one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. So yes, the correct answer was Glamour, and Daffodil moves up. Artist drops down to number 4. Oh my goodness! All right, Bree gets a little flame next to her name. So, boy, this is a tense game, folks. All right, let's move into the second half. Number 6. What was the flavor or type of soup listed on the very first Campbell soup can that Andy Warhol painted? It's in the title, but what was the flavor or type of soup listed on the very first Campbell soup can that Andy Warhol painted? Tomato, vegetable, chicken noodle, or split pea? Oh, no, it wasn't tomato. Yes, it was vegetable. The name of the title is Big Campbell Soup Can with Opener Vegetable. So, yes, vegetable was the very first, although I have to say one of his most famous single cans of soup, for some reason, has become the tomato soup can. Out of all those 32 variations, each one with a different flavor or type of soup, tomato has become the most famous for some reason. So let's check the scoreboard. Daffodil stays in the lead. Bree neck and neck. Again, scores are close. All right, let's keep on going. Number 7. In the later part of his career, Kandinsky created 3 types of paintings: impressions, improvisations, and what else? Symphonies, sonatas, quartets, or compositions. He had 3 types of paintings that he categorized his paintings into: impressions, improvisations, and one of these other 4. Oh, there is the answer. And it, yes, 90% of you again, it was compositions. Impressions, improvisations, and compositions. The photo, or the painting that I featured in the photo there, was one of those compositions. And the scoreboard, Daffodil up in the lead, 65-70. Now she's on fire. Look out, folks. Here we go. Let's move on. Question 8. Which of the 4 artists tonight was the youngest at the time of his death? Which of the 4 artists tonight was the youngest at the time of his death? Toulouse-Lautrec, Christy Brown, Kandinsky, or Andy Warhol? Time is up. And yes, most people got that correct. Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He was only 36 when he died, tragically. The oldest was Vasily Kandinsky. He died just a few days short of his 78th birthday. And, whoa, Bree takes the lead. It's going to be a photo finish, folks. We have 2 more questions left here. So let's keep on going. Number 9, what is the name of the famous dance that originated at the Moulin Rouge? It was very hard to find a photo that did not have the name of the dance listed on it. The tango, the Bolshoi, the Irish jig, or the can-can? What is the name of the famous dance that originated at the famous Moulin Rouge cabaret in Montmartre? Yes, of course, it's the can-can. Thought I'd throw an easy one in there for everyone. And let's see how that has affected the scores. And Bree is still at the top. Daffodil neck and neck. Vicky, artist Martha can go any way with this last question. Let's do it. Here we go. Bringing it home. Which actor portrayed Christy Brown in the 1989 film adaptation of his biography, My Left Foot? Jeremy Irons, Mark Wahlberg, Will Ferrell, or Daniel Day-Lewis? Which actor portrayed Christy Brown in the 1989 film, My Left Foot? and not the one you wish it was. Yes, it was Daniel Day-Lewis. I so wish it was Will Ferrell, but it was Daniel Day-Lewis. And I have to mention, folks, I rewatched this movie again in preparation for the presentation tonight. If this is a film you have not seen, you have to watch it from an artistic perspective, but also just to marvel at Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in the film. All right, here we go. The big moment. Let's find out who the top three are. Vicky, number 3, congratulations. Number 2, Daffodil. Number 1 is, of course, Bree. Oh, congratulations, Bree. Congratulations, Daffodil and Vicky. That was exciting. That was an exciting game. Thank you all for playing tonight. And thank you all for joining for the final virtual tour of the 2023 Spring Improving Lives Through Art series. I hope you all enjoyed the virtual tours this season, and I hope you will be joining us next week, next Tuesday, for our final paint along and final event of the series. And of course, after that, I hope to see some of you either here in person in Philadelphia, at my home away from home at the Barnes Foundation, at the live Improving Lives Benefit 2023, or at the virtual event 2 weeks later. So go to mymsaa.org to get more information about any of those events. And thank you, MSAA, for a wonderful Improving Lives Through Art series once again. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you next season for the fall 2023 Improving Lives Through Art series. Thanks again, and good night.